Good morning, good evening, whenever this may reach you. This is TV Papua News of September 2015. Bringing you this month, Pacific statements at the UN. Solomon and Tonga speak out. West Papua on the Pacific agenda at the PIF meeting. Indonesian intelligence and special forces form new Papua Peace Force. Hostage crisis and defamation by Indonesian media on alleged kidnapper. And human rights violations by the Indonesian security forces. Papuans urge them to withdraw. Pacific statements at the UN. Solomon and Tonga speak out. Both the Prime Ministers of Tonga and Solomon have highlighted the West Papuan freedom struggle. They highlighted it at the United Nations General Assembly. The Tongan Prime Minister Akilisi Pohiva has urged the world to take action on the human rights situation in West Papua.
Finally, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, most of us have come a long way looking with hope for solutions. Our political priorities must not distract us from the goal so well embodied in the 2030 agenda to leave no one behind. I re-emphasize that this goal speaks to us as leaders to work together against injustice and cruel violation of human rights, and as in the case of West Papua and Melanesia in the Pacific. This is within our power. It is a choice that those with power and privilege can make. United Nations has a duty to closely follow up this West Papua case and necessary action be taken to stop this brutal and inhumane activities. We, leaders, must rise to a higher moral order beyond interests and be guided by what is fair and justiciable to all. I'm concerned that the message delivered by His Holiness Pope Francis and other world leaders we have had in the last few days may not have been well and truly heard. We have an obligation, a duty, and I echo the challenge. We must meet this moral obligation internationally, regionally, and nationally, or else we will be left behind. I thank you, Mr. President.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Tonga for the statement just made, and I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
And also the Prime Minister of Solomon, Manasseh Sogavare, reminded the General Assembly of the continuing concerns of human rights violations in West Papua.
Mr. President, Solomon Islands reaffirms that human rights principles are universal, indivisible, interrelated, and must be treated in a fair manner. All states have a legal duty and moral responsibility to uphold, respect, and promote human rights, and when necessary, take preventive, protective, and punitive measures against human rights abuses or violations in accordance with the United Nations Charter and applicable international laws. Against the foregoing backdrop, the General Assembly is well aware of the continuing concerns of human rights violation in the Papua and West Papua regions of Indonesia. Solomon Islands, together with the Pacific Islands Forum, are seeking genuine dialogue and cooperation with Indonesia. The outreach is to resolve and dissolve reported allegations of human rights violations occurring on the two of Indonesia's ethnic Melanesian regions, namely Papua and West Papua. Solomon Islands further calls on the Geneva-based Human Rights Council to do more in investigating and monitoring of allegations of human rights abuse and violation on ethnic Melanesians in the concerned regions of Indonesia. We would like this issue attended to in a timely manner. In this connection, the Pacific Island Forum leaders in its recent Leaders Summit in Port Moresby approved the deployment of a fact-finding mission to West Papua to establish the alleged abuse of human rights there. We appeal to the government of Indonesia to allow free and unrestricted access to this mission in the true spirit of regional cooperation. In the long term, however, the United Nations cannot shy away from the root causes of these violations.
West Papua on the Pacific agenda at the PIF meeting. Leaders of the Pacific nations gathered in Port Moresby, which is the capital of Papua New Guinea, last month at the Pacific Islands Forum.
French, Polynesia, New Caledonia and Tokelau attended the formal sessions as associate members, while Timor-Leste attended as an observer in the 2015 Pacific Island Forum. The leaders have welcomed the progress made in the implementation of the framework for Pacific regionalism, including the establishment of the Specialist Subcommittee on Regionalism.
The ongoing genocide and human rights violations in West Papua was one of the main subjects to be handled.
Chaired by Papua New Guinea's Prime Minister Peter O'Neill, the 46th Pacific Island Forum reached several understanding on issues affecting the Pacific, including climate change and West Papua.
And representatives of the United Liberations Movement of West Papua, Benny Wenda and Octavianus Motte, were prevented to attend the forum meeting. Mr. Wenda was denied for the second time a visa for Papua New Guinea, and Mr. Motte was asked, politely, to leave the venue as the PIF was not a political but a development platform. The Pacific Islands Association of Non-Governmental Organizations also gathered in Port Moresby for a civil society partnership forum. The organizations first offered a collective public apology to the West Papuans for their past ignorance and neglect of their sufferings, and jointly called for Pacific leaders to send a high-level PIF delegation on a fact-finding mission to West Papua.
And a fact-finding mission. We're also calling for the reinscription of West Papua in the decolonization list of the United Nations.
The leaders of 16 Pacific countries communicated their collective position on West Papua in the PIF's communiqué, raising their concerns regarding human rights violations in West Papua. They requested the Prime Minister of PNG to consult with the Indonesian government on the establishment of a fact-finding mission to West Papua. This mission is meant to assess the human rights situation in West Papua. Consequently, the Papua issue is now a Pacific issue. Pacific CSOs and leaders of the Pacific countries will now be following the situation closely, particularly possible human rights violations in the western half of the New Guinea island. Pacific leaders may now raise the Papua issue at sub-regional, regional, and even international forums. For 5 decades now, the security approach has failed. The government is strongly urged to explore peaceful means to address the situation. Indonesian intelligence and special forces form new Papua Peace Force. As a reaction to the Indonesian State Intelligence Agency, has said to form a so-called Papua Peace Force. Its chairman, Sutioso, explained that the task force is composed of representatives of the intelligence agency and also involves members of the Kopassus Special Force. Both bodies have a long alleged history of human rights abuses in West Papua. Hostage crisis and defamation by Indonesian media on alleged kidnapper. On Wednesday, 9th of September, an Indonesian man named Kuba was shot by unknown assailants while cutting wood in the forest area of Kirum, which is about an hour away from the border with Papua New Guinea. And shortly after that, 2 Indonesian men, Sudirman and Badar, were captured and taken to the other side of the Papua New Guinea border, where they were held hostage in a village near the 2 countries' common border. The Papua New Guinea Defense Forces managed to free the men on Friday the 18th of September, and the 2 were released unharmed. During the crisis itself, there was no letter or communication regarding the identity of the hostage takers. Unfortunately, the Indonesian media and the Indonesian army were very quickly creating a fake link between the hostage crisis and the successful West Papuan human rights lobby that was taking place at the same time during the Pacific Islands Forum in Port Moresby. The Indonesian media spread the unconfirmed story that Mr. Jeffrey Bomai, a respected West Papuan human rights activist living in PNG, was behind the hostage-taking. Mr. Jeffrey Bomai himself had extensively and successfully lobbied the PAF mechanism with other NGOs. He firmly denied the allegations to the media and to the Papuan police. According to a spokesperson of the Papuan Armed Resistance Movement, the hostage crisis was carried out by one of their leaders named Lucas Bomai. This was confirmed by the delayed delivery of a letter signed by the same Lucas Bomai, stating that the reason of the hostage-taking was a way to force the Indonesian government to talk about West Papua's right to independence. And the letter also identified the two Indonesian hostages as agents of the Indonesian Special Forces, or Kopassus, and not as two simple Indonesian woodworkers as described by the Indonesian media. The Indonesian side is using the false information which they spread to undermine Mr. Jeffrey Bomai's credibility and his work as a human rights defender. Their goal is to have him deported back to Indonesia, where his safety is not assured. Human rights organizations in Indonesia and Papua New Guinea have severely criticized the way the Indonesian media, security forces and government pointed the finger at the human rights activists' campaign during the entire crisis. Human rights violations by the Indonesian security forces, and Papuans urged them to withdraw. Students united under the Papuan Student Alliance demanded during a protest that the Indonesian President Jokowi investigates human rights abuses by the Indonesian security forces. The protest was a reaction on the killings of two civilians in August last month by the Indonesian military. The students claim that the number of Papuans killed since 1963 has reached at least 500,000 people. And according to the statistics of Central Statistics at the agency, West Papua is currently occupied by 1.7 Melanesians and 2.3 foreigners, of which mostly Indonesians. They urge the Indonesian government for the withdrawal of Indonesian security forces and to open access for the international journalists to cover these human rights abuses and genocide in West Papua. And also human rights activist Jones Dow urged the withdrawal of the troops from West Papua. He said he was very disappointed with the series of attacks against civilians in Papua, such as the shootings in Timika last August, the shooting in Panyai in December 2014, and the shooting of two vocational school students in Timika on the 28th of September. The actions of the security forces were very inhumane. It caused one person named Caleb Bagau, 18 years old, to die, and Efrando Subarovek, 70 years old, to be badly injured and now in hospital. The character of the law enforcement officials, especially the police and task forces TNI Kopassus, lately showed their misbehavior. As IS observers and human rights activists in Papua condemned the perpetrators, said Jones. We Papuans continue to be killed and we are like animals in the eyes of Indonesia. I demand President Jokowi to pull out the military from West Papua because they